So what is esports? What are esports? I'm sure everyone kind of knows what they are by now, but at one point, like a decade ago, when I started giving this talk, esports weren't as prevalent as they are now. In fact, I remember asking the class of about 40 people at the University of Alberta, hey, who has watched an esport before? And like maybe 1/3 or 1/4 of the class actually put their hand up. I'm sure if I asked, all of you watching on Twitch, have you ever watched esports before? I'm sure all of you would say yes now. But there was a time when that was not the case. And so, yeah, esports, well, I haven't answered the question yet. Esports or electronic sports is essentially the professional side of gaming, right? So here on the slide is just an example of a Counter-Strike team, I believe. Yeah, that's Counter-Strike there. And so teams that have coaches, that have players, and the players compete either solo or on teams in various professional video games. Now, I like to start off the talk with this, conversation. Are esports really sports? Because I've heard so many people complain that, they're called esports, but they're not really sports, are they? And so this argument is so dumb. But anyway, it's pretty obvious that esports aren't as physical as some things that you would call a sport. But in my opinion, they are more physical than other things you might call a sport, right? So for example, some people would call darts a sport, right? But is darts as much of a sport as, say, StarCraft or Counter-Strike? I don't know. So let's just have a look at an example here. So here's a little graph I made up of traditional sports versus electronic sports, right, or esports. So both of them are competitive. They're extremely competitive. Both of them require a high amount of strategy and a high amount of skill. Both of them are played professionally, so people make literally millions of dollars, and I'll show some stats on that at the end of the lecture. But of course, esports salaries aren't as high as normal sports salaries, but there are definitely people out there making 7-8 figures a year doing esports, or at least live streaming. They have annual salaries and sponsored players, so there are people out there with sponsors who play for different teams, and those teams give them annual salaries. They have millions of fans every year. Obviously, esports aren't quite caught up to regular sports yet, but they're very quickly growing. Here's the real controversial topic, is whether or not there's a physical ability required. And so it's pretty obvious that yes, esports require physical ability, right? It takes a physical ability to be able to take a mouse and click on someone's head for the headshot, or aim the mouse at a zergling that's moving across a screen, right? There is aim, there is precision, there is also endurance, but there isn't what I would call a physical strength factor, right? And so what some people consider sports are things like that. I've heard one definition of traditional sports where physical strength, if you are stronger, it will make you better, right? And that's kind of an interesting definition, but does not apply to every sport, right? In a lot of sports, more skill would make you far better at the sport than more strength. So anyway, are there national betting scandals? Yes, there are national betting scandals in both sports and esports. So, for example, in South Korea, we've seen several national betting scandals related to the South Korean mafia, fixing StarCraft matches and stuff. It was all ridiculous. But so far, there haven't been any riots after your favorite esports team loses, right? So, I'm looking at you, Vancouver, for your riots after the NHL finals in a specific year, which I can't remember. Now, I used to have this slide which played a couple of videos on what esports were, but that's honestly useless now because you all kind of know what esports are, and these videos are horribly out of date. They're from 2013, so I'm not even going to play those. All right. But let's look at the history of competitive gaming, all right? Competitive gaming wasn't always around, but I'll show you, what I want to show you is the transition from the very first video games toward what we now view as competitive video games. So, if I had asked you what the first video game was, you probably, or a lot of people may have said Pong, right? So if you ask 100 people what the first video game was, I'd say 95 to 100 of them will say Pong, because that's what we've been told. But it turns out that electronic games have been around for a very, very long time. And so, for example, we have the amazingly named cathode ray tube amusement device in 1947. From 1950 to 1960, we had various board games implemented in computers. And the first instances of artificial intelligence for games are actually from the 1950s, which is crazy. A really famous one, Birdie the Brain. This was the first ever game AI, and that was in 1950 for tic-tac-toe. In 1958, we had Tennis for Two, which was, I believe, the first actual player versus player game. It may have been single player, I'm not sure. In 1962, we had Space War, and in 1972, we had Pong, okay? So there's a really amazing video. Who out there has watched any of the Ahoy YouTube channel? AHOY. There's a video there called The First Video Game. And here's the YouTube link to that, so take a screenshot and go watch that. It's a truly amazing video on the history of what could be defined as the first actual video game. And he goes through and defines what he would believe a video game to be. But what the really interesting thing is here, to me at least, from a really like pedantic computer science-y point of view, is that here, most people would say that Pong is the first video game. And we may say, oh, LOL, they don't know about the video games that came before that. But the cool thing that this video shows is that the answer of Pong may actually be correct in a way. And the way in which it can be correct is that the term video game was coined to describe Pong. Okay? So while things existed before Pong that we would now call video games, the first mention of a video game in the popular culture was Pong. And so it's a really interesting definition, what would you call a video game? Well, some people would actually have an argument for Pong because nothing was called a video game until Pong came out. But anyway, that's just me being pedantic, but I like doing that. All right. So, in 1972 was the first recorded video game tournament, and it was held at MIT, Massachusetts Institute of Technology, in 1972, and they played the game Space War. And so 5 people competed. Here's a photograph of the winner, Bruce Baumgart, winner of the 5-man free-for-all at the first Intergalactic Space War Olympics, brandishing control buttons in triumph. That is the what do you call it? The caption here for this image. The first prize was a Rolling Stone magazine subscription. So very, very humble beginnings, but there had to be a first recorded tournament, right? And I'm sure that people played Pong or whatever before this, but was that supposed to be 72 or 62? I can't remember. But I think it's 72. But this is the first recorded video game tournament, and its first prize was quite humble for the time. So, up until, if we go back, up until the early 70s, pretty much every video game was really, inaccessible to the public. There were some arcade devices that you could call video games, but for the most part, up until the mid-60s, all of these games ran on, academic level computer hardware, right? So only people who were at places like MIT or Berkeley or things like that, who had access to these giant computers, could actually play these games. And because this is before the Apple II, before really homebrew computing, this is still at the level of academics only owning the computers. So video games really start to take off when they enter the home. right? So 1977 to 1983 was really the huge boom in video games mainly because of the Atari 2600 video computer system. And the Atari 2600, who out there has actually played a physical Atari 2600? It's pretty awesome. I've played it. I'm really bad at it. I am very bad at using joysticks, but it worked, right? It played video games. Some of them were remarkably great. Some of them were remarkably bad, but that's all you can do. It's really the first popular home video game system. And so in 1980, Atari hosted the first ever what you would consider an esports event. And that was a Space Invaders tournament in 1980. And so, sorry, I'm just looking at some of the questions here in the chat. Yeah, so some people have played the Atari. So, widely considered the first real esports event, more than 10,000 people competed nationwide. And from what I understand, what happened is major cities in the US held their own qualifiers, and then the winners of those qualifiers went to like a regionals, and the winners of the regionals went to like this national finals. And there was an article that I saw that noted Space Invaders elbow, they called it. And it was from like moving around the joystick too much. And so some kids were suffering from this like Space Invaders elbow. And so I like to call this the first recorded esports injury, which is pretty entertaining. In 1981, Tournament Games, TGI, Tournament Games International, I think, held a national video game competition. It was a 3-day event, and they played Centipede, and I believe this was actually an arcade machine tournament. It was at the Chicago Exposition Center, and they thought that between 10,000 and 15,000 people would enter, but only 150 people ended up entering because they charged a $60 entry fee. And at the time, video games were still like highly stigmatized towards just children. And so what kid has $60, to enter this? Not only was there a $60 entry fee, but at the tournament, you had to put quarters into the machine to play the machines. So it was kind of bad, but that's all you can do. And the really one interesting thing that they had here was at the time, video games, and still even today, video games are really, really marketed towards males, right? And especially back in the 1980s, unfortunately, all the video game advertisements were pretty much strictly for male consumers. But even back in 1981, they realized that, there aren't as many female players, and so in order to encourage more female players, they also had a first female prize if the winner of the overall prize was not male. And so I thought that was really cool that they did that. Okay. So, lots of people were competing in video games, and they wanted some way of keeping track of high scores, right? Because up until now, basically what you did was you played a video game like Space Invaders, or you played Centipede or whatever, and you got a score, and that score was how you were judged in the tournament. And so based on all these scores, they wanted there to be like a Guinness Book of video games. And so in 1982, the Twin Galaxies scoreboard was launched. The founder was Walter Day. It started in the summer of 81. And he went around to like hundreds of arcades and manually recorded the highest scores at the arcades in order to form this document. And after it launched with all of those scores, then they allowed people to submit their own scores with like proof, right? So you had to send in, it was a pretty high burden of proof. You have to like send in a videotape of you playing the game. And they also held competitions, and they like held one in California the first year and invited some top ranked players. But, since all of this has transpired in the last 40 years, we have later found out that Walter Day and Twin Galaxies is not the most reputable scorekeeping body. And so take what I'm saying here with a grain of salt. At the time, they were really the only entity around. But we've gotten much, much more accurate scorekeeping since then. All right. 1981... to 1983, video games started appearing on television. And so we had the first televised video games. Over here, rest in peace, Alex Trebek, recently passed away. But Alex Trebek used to host a television show called StarCade. And on StarCade, they used to actually play video games. And so they'd play, like, on one tournament, they played Defender, Centipede, and Pac-Man. And then, like, the high scores combined, the winners then went on to play Donkey Kong. And the prize was actually, like, a computer. So Apple II and asteroids and some prize money for that. There was also a show called That's Incredible. You can see this down here. And this was one of these, like, Discovery Channel type science shows where every show they would show something new. Yes, that's the guy from Jeopardy. Someone is asking. Alex Trebek used to host this show. And so it was like a reality show that went around and talked about different technologies. And they sometimes had video games. And so what I'm going to show now is an actual video clip from that show. And I really love this video clip because there's a lot of, like, foreshadowing in this video clip. So let's just listen to that for a bit.
Ben Gold is a 16-year-old high school sophomore at Green Hill School in Dallas. He's a nice, normal kid who happens to be very good in mathematics, plays on his high school baseball team, and plays video games. He plays video games some more, and some more. In fact, he's a champion video player who holds the world's record for the highest score on Stargate. It took him some 35 hours and 50 minutes to accumulate 40,001,150 points when he set the record in September.
You gotta figure them out. You don't just sit there and play and play and play. You gotta use your mind and try to figure out how to beat him. What's the machine's weakness? Because every machine has a weakness.
He holds world's records on video games, and he was also seen on national television last January. In fact, Ben competed against two of the top video game aces in the country on That's Incredible. And he won. And that seems appropriate for a guy that lays awake nights thinking video strategy.
Sometimes some of my best strategies come when I'm at night in bed and just thinking, and then I'm saying to myself, God, what's my problem? And then I'll come up with some great strategy and I'll try it the next day, and maybe that's the secret.
Now, if you're wondering what a video wizard can possibly do with his skills, Ben has an answer.
There's going to be professional video game players. People are going to start making money off of them.
And you want to be there?
Oh, I want to be in the middle of it.
So some foreshadowing there from Ben. I really like that clip, but let's continue on. And unfortunately, Ben wasn't one of the first, like, real professional video gamers, but he went on. He was legit for his day, for sure. 1983 to 1985 saw what was called the video game crash. If you've never heard of this, there are documentaries about this which are truly excellent. I highly recommend watching them. So what happened was, now there are other factors in place here as well, but this is one of the main factors. The Atari 2600 basically completely dominated the home video game market. What they didn't do was have anything like region locking or oversight or licensing of games. So what happened with the 2600 was that anyone could publish a game for the 2600. As long as you had the ability to, like, make a game and actually release it to the public, then you could make a game for the 2600. And so what happened was the market was completely flooded with bad games. So you have a video game system, it's the only one. There's terrible games all over the place. And what's happening now is that the home PC market is starting to take off as well. And so with the home PC market, people were buying these home PCs, usually not for video games, but they could also fulfill some of their video game needs. And other things like word processing, which were just starting to get popular at the time. And not only that, but Atari really dumped a bunch of resources into two huge games that were supposed to, like, save the system. The first one was Pac-Man, and the second was E.T. the Extraterrestrial. And E.T. especially was one of the worst video games ever made. I saw someone talking about it in the chat already today. But what happened with E.T., here's a screenshot from E.T., by the way. That's supposed to be E.T., and the gameplay is not much more exciting than that. It was like hard to play, you didn't know what to do, it looked nothing like the movie. It was a complete disaster, and the reason it was a disaster is because they had like 6 weeks to make it or something ridiculous. And so what happened was, in order to like stop this terrible game from getting out, they took warehouses of this cart of Atari, and they buried it in a landfill, right? So they took like hundreds of thousands of cartridges of E.T. and they buried them. And there's videos out there where like modern archaeologists or news reporters or whatever went and found the landfill and dug it up and found these carts. It's crazy, these video game cartridges. And so it truly was an astronomical crash, okay? So here's the sales figures. In 1982, there were $3.2 billion in sales. And 3 years later, it was 1/30th of that. So it was a 97% drop in video game sales. And it was really, really, like, when have you ever seen a 97% drop in anything? And so people thought, okay, video games were a fad. They're out of style now. They'll never come back. So that's it. That's it for the US video game market. It's just dead. However, thankfully, Nintendo came along. So what Nintendo did was, in 1983, the Famicom, or Family Computer, was released in Japan. In 1985, it came out in the US as the Nintendo Entertainment System. So here's what you see is the NES, probably all of you know and love, the Nintendo Entertainment System. But this was released in Japan as the Family Computer. So the first thing they did was, instead of marketing this to kids as a video game system, they marketed it as a family computer that the whole family could enjoy. And so it wasn't branded as a child's toy, and so it helped really bridge that marketing gap between video games and computer systems. It had officially licensed games, so that meant that you could not make a game and sell it for the Nintendo without having the Nintendo seal of approval on your game, right? So here's that yellow sticker that you're probably all familiar with. They sold 62 million consoles worldwide, which blew the Atari 2600 out of the water. And then just a little bit later, the Sega Master System came out. It was the Sega Mark III in Japan, the Master System in the United States, and there were 13 million consoles sold. Excuse me. And so what you saw here was a complete turnaround a few years later of the video game market. So if we just look at this graph, this only goes up to 2013, but the blue line is arcade revenue, the red line is consumer revenue, and the green line is the total revenue for the US video game market in billions of dollars, okay? So, for example, if you look here, there was no real consumer video game market before the early 1970s. And what you see is it really reached its peak a few years into the Atari 2600 when you have this red spike here on the graph going up to about $6 billion in video game revenue. But as we just saw, the 2600 went from $3 billion of revenue in 82 down to just like $100 million in 1985. And it wasn't, like, you can see that even the arcade sales dropped in that period of time because people were just like completely disenfranchised with video games. But then in 1985, with the release of the Nintendo, you saw video game sales start to rise again, especially in the home market, and peaking for a while at the end of the 1980s. But you see here that until really the mid-1990s, it was still arcade revenue that was dominating the home market. You may not think that arcades were that big, but they really were. Who out there has actually played in an arcade against another human being? I loved that so much. it was such a different environment to actually go play games like with someone else. So if any of you are in the class, I'm not sure if you're old enough to remember this, but in the Avalon Mall, where I guess the Foot Locker is now, above the Winners. So that Winners used to be a movie theater, and above the movie theater was an arcade. So not where the arcade is now, but where it used to be. I remember spending like hundreds of dollars at that arcade. It was crazy. But anyway, I'm digressing there. But then toward the beginning of the millennium, arcades really started to plummet, right? And now there's a little bit of an arcade resurgence, but nothing compared to what it used to be. And now, if you see here, even by 2013, actually by 2007 even, almost all video game revenue is from the home consumer market rather than the arcade market. Here's another graph, which I have stretched a little bit just to fit the screen. But you can see here that this pink down here is the arcade revenue. The purple is console revenue. And so console revenue has been steadily growing since the late 1980s. But what we're seeing here, this blue line, was the handheld console market. So this is things like the Game Boy, what's the PlayStation 1? Like they had like the Vita, and so these are the dedicated handheld consoles, like the DSX, that sort of thing. PSP, that's right, the PSP, thank you. And so that's what this blue line here is. But what we see now is that with the introduction of mobile gaming on your phone, like there's almost no reason to have a dedicated gaming device anymore. And I know some of the diehard Nintendo DS fans out there will scoff at me for saying that, but the numbers don't lie, right? I'd say that it's the DS and Pokemon like keeping this these handhelds alive here. And so mobile gaming is actually the majority share of revenue now. And yeah, so the Nintendo Switch is not a mobile console, right? They would definitely put that in with console rather than handheld. But if you look here, consoles are less revenue than personal computers, so PC gaming really took over things. And not only that, but mobile took over PC gaming. And so, and a really cool thing is that in the last 4 or 5 years, we're seeing virtual reality revenues rise as well. So who knows? Maybe if I give this talk 10 years from now, maybe virtual reality will be like eclipsing home consoles or something like that. But it's just really neat to see like the trends, and especially mobile versus handheld, because that's like just a completely inverse graph. Because if you have a handheld console or a handheld mobile gaming device built into your phone, then you don't need a console anymore. Okay, so in 1990, Nintendo had the first video game championship that was sponsored by one of the creators of the video games themselves. So the Nintendo World Championships were huge. The competition was held in 29 different cities. The winners in the cities got $250 and a trip for two to the World Finals at Universal Studios Hollywood. Here is what they did for the games played. It was ridiculous. Like, whoever came up with this formula, you had to get 50 coins as fast as possible in Super Mario Brothers. Then you had to beat a Rad Racer custom course. And then you had to play Tetris until the time ran out. And your score was equal to the time for Super Mario Brothers plus the 10 times the Rad Racer score plus 25 times your Tetris score. It was like ridiculous. But the really cool thing is that they had 3 prize levels. One was for under 11. One was for 12 to 17, this is supposed to say. Sorry, 12 to 17. And the other prize was for 18 plus. And so I think the winner of each one got like $10,000. The 18 plus got a 1990 Geo Metro and a 40-inch rear projection TV, which was, I don't know if any of you remember 1990, but a 40-inch TV in 1990, whew, crazy. And he also got a gold-plated Mario trophy. But not only that, there were special cartridges, NES cartridges made for this Nintendo World Championship competition. And those cartridges, there were like maybe a couple of hundred of them made, and they sell for tens of thousands of dollars now. It's crazy how much, and they're officially the rarest official game ever released by Nintendo. Fighting games. Up until now, all of the competition that you've seen has been in single-player games. And so what happened was, like this, you'd have to come up with some ridiculous score in order to be able to judge who won your game, right? So it might be the score in one game plus another one. If someone could beat the game the fastest, but maybe they didn't get the high score, like who's better at the game, who knows? But along comes fighting games. And Street Fighter II and Mortal Kombat, they were not the first fighting games, but they were definitely the first really popular competitive fighting games. And what it did was it really introduced the versus competition to competitive video gaming. And so previously we saw that everything was based on these scores or times, but now we have 1 versus 1 winner-take-all competition. Not only that, but there's strategic competition where you can actively compete against someone else and like stop them, right? So you doing damage to them means they're not doing damage to you, unlike a racing game that's single player or something like Pac-Man where you can just do as well as you want without anyone interfering with you. So this, you don't really think about this much today, but before Street Fighter II, that's basically what competitive gaming was high scores. And with that, with fighting games came a huge violence controversy. So Street Fighter II had like realistic violence, people kicking each other in the face, whatever. But Mortal Kombat really took this to the next level, and it had like the first realistic blood effects in the game. And I remember here I am just telling stories about my youth again. I was in grade 6 when Mortal Kombat came out. And I remember that very specifically because I faked being sick to stay home to play it from school. And I remember that the teachers were like, why wasn't there anyone in school yesterday? And it was because all the guys stayed home because Mortal Kombat came out that day. And because it was Mortal Monday, that's what they called it. That's what all the ads were on TV, like Mortal Monday. Anyway. So, because of the blood in Mortal Kombat, the Entertainment Software Ratings Board, the ESRB, was introduced in 1994 because of Mortal Kombat and the uproar that all the boomers out there were saying that, oh, video games are teaching our children to freeze people and rip their spines out or whatever they, thought that they were doing. So, the ESRB was brought about basically because of the Mortal Kombat controversy. Okay, so up until 1993, yes, now we have versus competition, but it's all local. You have to be in the same room as somebody, okay? 1993, now, yes, there were definitely networked games before this, especially multi-user dungeons and RPGs and stuff like that. But if we're talking about like actual what was popular and what made this like take off, we're talking about Doom. Like let's not kid ourselves here. So Doom was the first Wolfenstein was the first really popular first-person shooter, but Doom took that to the absolute next level, right? There's really no arguing the fact that Doom is probably the most important video game of all time, at least for the PC. So now we had networked play being possible. You could play online either via IP or via modem. Who out there has ever played a game with a direct modem connection? Raise your hand out there if you've played with a modem connection. You actually had to call somebody. No one's saying anything yet. But so I remember this in grade 7. Me and my friends, the first games we played, the first game I played online was Descent, which was a 3D space shooter type game. And then after that was Quake, and Quake basically got me hooked. But we'll talk about Quake in a few minutes. No, sorry. First it was Warcraft 2, then it was Descent, and then it was Quake. I actually didn't play Doom online because when I had Doom, I didn't have a modem, but that's fine. But Doom also introduced, with like the rise of the internet at the time. Sorry, let me go back. So the way that you played with a modem, it's crazy that this isn't, common knowledge, but, this was like more than 20 years ago. So the way that you played with a modem is you had a modem attached to your home phone line, like your actual like landline connection. So did your buddy playing somewhere else. You would start the game and your modem would be in like a waiting for call state. They would call your phone number, your modem would pick up, and then they'd talk to each other. And that's how you played the game. And I remember like being in the middle of a heated match, and then like my mom would pick up the phone and I'd be like, "Mom, put the phone back." He just like interrupted my game if they wanted to use the phone. So anyway, or you could connect to the internet with your modem and then play over IP address. That was also possible. So with the internet came online leaderboards, and those online leaderboards specifically for Doom introduced the first achievements. And those achievements were like, you could take screenshots of how fast you played the game, or like how well you played the game, or whether you completed it on Nightmare or not, and they would give you achievements on these websites. Not only achievement, like Doom made everything, okay? It did online play, it did first-person shooters, it was like mouse-controlled aiming, achievement systems online. There was also demo sharing. So right now, if you want to go watch someone play a video game, you just log on to Twitch, or you log on to YouTube, or whatever. But back in the day, video files were so hard to share online because they were so gigantic. If you could even record a video somehow and digitize it, which many people couldn't, they were so large that your internet connection couldn't handle it. And so what most games back then had was called a demo file. So you could start recording, and instead of recording the screen as a video, it would record your inputs as an input file. Remember a few lectures ago when I was talking about our action system and how you could record a replay file? Well, that's essentially what these demos were. They recorded your keystrokes and your mouse movements and stuff like that. And those files would maybe be like tens or hundreds of kilobytes rather than hundreds of megabytes. And so online they would have demo archives, and in order to watch the demo, you'd have to download the demo file and then load it in the Doom client. And because you could have demo files, now you could do speedrunning. So this is really the birth of speedrunning, was Doom being played as fast as possible online. And so if you're into speedrunning, I watch a lot of speedrunning online. These speedrunning challenges like beat Nightmare as fast as possible, or beat it without taking damage, or whatever, all of this was because of Doom online. And not only that, but Doom, they released tools for modding Doom. So, like, eventually the Doom source code became available, and these tools that people made were just amazing. And so I remember as a kid playing, like, Barney Doom, where all the enemies in Doom were replaced with Barney the dinosaur or Simpsons characters or whatever. And when you hit, like, Homer Simpson with a rocket, he'd say, like, some quote from The Simpsons. And so it was really, really interesting that all of this stuff came from the same game and basically the same programmer. So like John Carmack made all of like modern gaming possible. It's ridiculous how much he contributed to the world in terms of gaming. And with the game modifications came tool-assisted gaming as well. So you could manually create these demo files and upload like what the theoretical best run for a given level might be. Okay. Someone in the chat said, I kind of remember the sound when someone picked up the phone online. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I like the screeching sound when you dialed in. Oh, just thinking of all the memories of that and yelling at people not to pick up the phone. It's just nostalgia. Now, the mid-90s introduced Warcraft 2. So I'm just listing Warcraft 2 here, but about the same time as well was Command & Conquer. So Warcraft 2, Command & Conquer. Warcraft 2 was a real-time strategy or RTS game. You had orcs and you had humans, and the orcs and the human races were basically mirror images of each other, but there was one unit different between them. The humans had a knight, and the ogres had and the orcs had an ogre. It turned out that the orc ogre was way better than the human knight, and so everyone just played orc all the time. And it introduced online play to real-time strategy games, which meant it was really the first super competitive RTS game. But one of even almost as important, or even more important than how good the game was how good the tools were for the game. And so I've talked about this a bit already in the course, but Warcraft 2 released a map editor, and the map editor allowed people to create custom maps for the game. And with those custom maps, you could have custom units, custom game rules, make your own levels. Here we see like a screenshot of that map editor. It was absolutely phenomenal. And this is foreshadowing for something was to come. Something that is to come. 1996 and 97, we have Quake and QuakeCon. So Quake was the first true 3D first-person shooter. It introduced jumping to first-person shooter games. You had different movement speed. You had way improved physics. You had things like circle jumping, strafe jumping, wall running. There were more weapons in the game. It had a server-client network architecture, which was vastly improved over Doom. You could have dozens of players at once. You had team deathmatch. All sorts of crazy stuff was introduced with Quake. It consumed my life for junior high. Absolutely crazy. I remember like getting my first computer that could run Quake. I installed the demo version of Quake from 8 floppy disks and barely had enough RAM to run Quake, but it was amazing. It was a great time to be alive. QuakeCon was a huge LAN tournament, not the first one, but the first major one. 650 players attended. There was also after QuakeCon, there was this event called Red Annihilation. Dennis Thresh Fong. So if you ever heard of Thresh, the Quake player from like 20 years ago, he was by far the best player in the world. And at Red Annihilation, the first prize was John Carmack's 1987 Ferrari 328 GTS, which was like a $100,000 car at the time. And absolutely crazy. This was by far the biggest prize that had ever been given for an esports event up until that point, and for many years to come, actually. In 1997, Quake World, Quake Spy, and Team Fortress came out. So, when I say that you could network play in these games, what you essentially had to do was go on IRC or call your real-life friend. So if you called your real-life friend, you'd say, okay, I'm going to go start Doom. I'll start up my modem. Call me with your modem in 2 minutes when it's all set up. That's what you had to do. Or you'd like log online, go on IRC, go to like the Quake channel or the Doom channel, get someone who was looking for a game who was spamming in the chat, and like get their IP address, contact them and say, I'm going to join you. Like there was no server listing. Like if you just log into Overwatch and hit quick play, oh my God, what we wouldn't have given for that back in the day. There was no quick play. You had to actually go interact with people. Like imagine that. But at the same time, because there was like a lot of work involved with playing against people, you saw far less toxicity than exists today, in my opinion. But anyway, that's for another talk. So what Quake World was an update to the engine for Quake that had improved hardware acceleration. So I remember I had a Voodoo 3 graphics card that finally worked with Quake World, and so it was like the first true... so even though this was a 3D game, it was still running in software unless you had a video card at the time, and video cards were actually pretty rare. So Quake World had improved support for 3D acceleration, and also a way improved networking and lag, netcode is what I'm trying to say. Way improved netcode. Whereas before, if you were playing Quake and you had like a half-second ping, if you tried to walk forward, it wouldn't start moving forward for a half a second. And if you let go walking, it wouldn't stop walking for a half a second. And with the improved netcode, they had like rollback netcode and prediction netcode and stuff that like you take for granted in every game nowadays. But Quake World was just amazing in terms of how much better it made online play, especially with non-T1 connections. Has anyone ever heard the term LPB? LPB was the saltiest term ever back in the day, and you're all just going to Google it, but it meant low ping bastard. And you'd call people LPBs because when they were in the game and they had like a 50 ping or a 100 ping, that was such a low ping that of course that was why they won the game, right? You're sitting there with like a 300 ping, like a normal person. Oh man, it's crazy how different it is nowadays. But this is my version of like I had to walk to school naked in the snow, 4 miles or whatever, is that the fact that I had a modem. Then Quake Spy came out. Quake Spy changed the game again because you could install Quake Spy, it would detect when you ran a server, and then it would list your game in a bunch of, like, in a public way. So over here, for example, there's a bunch of games. This Quake Spy was originally just for Quake, and then Quake Spy became Game Spy, and then Game Spy became a terrible website. But over here, you can see Game Spy, where you can click, and this is like their listing of currently publicly hosted games. You could have favorite servers, you could have a friends list. Eventually, you could chat on Game Spy as well, which was incredible. Online gameplay absolutely exploded with Quake Spy. It became Game Spy later on. And Team Fortress was released as a mod to Quake and introduced class-based combat and CTF and multiple objectives. So, if you look at all the things that Doom did, and then look at all the things that Quake did, especially with Quake World, Quake Spy, and Team Fortress, like, it's IDs, like, id Software created online gaming. It's crazy how much they contributed to the world. And in my opinion, oh man, I should really... Maybe I'll talk about this a bit in the next lecture, but... Yeah, there's going to be something in the next lecture about a single function that made 3D gaming possible, and because of that, 3D graphics cards became a thing, and because of that, like, Bitcoin became a thing, and how John Carmack basically changed the world. But anyway, I'll talk about that. I'll talk about that in another lecture. Okay, 1997. The CPL was formed, the Cyber Athlete Professional League. It was the first real link between gamers and athletes, cyber athletes. It was an absolute pioneer in video gaming competitions and tournaments. The first year, it just played Quake. It was called the Frag. It had $4,000 in prizes. In 1998 was Frag 2. It played Quake and Quake 2. And then as the years went on, it started incorporating like StarCraft and Counter-Strike and all sorts of different games. 1998 rolls around, 1999, and StarCraft and BattleNet come out. So Warcraft 2 was the first competitive RTS game. StarCraft was the first super competitive RTS game. For those of you who are out in the chat asking what the hell I'm talking about, I'm supposed to be talking about shaders right now, but I lost my slides, so I have to remake them this weekend. So I'll talk about that on Tuesday. If you type !playlist, you can see the entire playlist for the course if you want, and you can go watch all the previous lectures. So StarCraft came out, and StarCraft was incredible. It no longer had symmetric gameplay. So up until this point, if you played like Axis versus Allies or Warcraft or any of those games, it was basically two races, but they were the copies of each other, right? There was the Axis and the Allies, there was the Orcs and the humans, but now there were three completely separate races. And somehow, through the magic of Blizzard at the time, the game was balanced and competitive and strategic and fast-paced. 400 APM, actions per minute. But not only that, they greatly improved the ability to play online with BattleNet. So BattleNet came around, and I'm sure you all know what BattleNet is now, but BattleNet was the first in-game networking client for video game, okay? Yeah, someone said last time a Blizzard game was balanced, really. So BattleNet had online matchmaking, you could browse games, you could have friends lists, you could go into chat rooms, there was a ranked online ladder, it was a game changer. You could also see the ping that someone had, okay? Like it was incredible, absolutely incredible, and changed all modern gaming since, because now every game comes with its own server and matchmaking abilities. But still no quick play. Quick play didn't come around until like 2012 or something. I don't know why quick play took so long. But like I think like Call of Duty may have been the first really popular, just like hit a button, play a game. All right. 1998, 1999, Half-Life and Counter-Strike. Absolutely incredible games, incredible game engine. The first, now, some people say that Team Fortress was the first like tactical shooter. That was not so much tactical as it was strategic and class-based. But Counter-Strike, as you know, there are no classes. You have 5 versus 5 teams. You have a terrorist team versus a counter-terrorist team. You had a money system, a currency system. You could buy weapons. It was much more strategic than just deathmatch. You had way improved spectator mode. You had modes dedicated to esports. It was super popular. By far the most popular FPS of its time. There were over 90,000 peak players online for this in the 90s. In the 90s, 90,000 peak players. That's crazy numbers by like pre-2000 standards. Now, I made this in like 2014 or something, but just, CSGO has way more players than that now. But I don't know, 5 years ago or whenever I made these slides, CSGO had like 600,000 peak players. But you look at like 90,000 people in the 90s. Absolutely incredible. And not only that, but Half-Life... There's a real argument to be made between whether or not Counter-Strike or StarCraft started modern-day esports. And I would say that it was both. And after I explain the following slide, I'll explain why I think it was both. So, in 1999, around the same time as Counter-Strike, the OGN Star League, or OSL, was formed in Korea, and you also saw the formation of KESPA, or the Korean Esports Association. So this was a Korean StarCraft league. StarCraft skyrocketed in Korea. For whatever reason, South Korea fell in love with StarCraft. The Korean Esports Association, or KESPA, it was founded with the approval of the government officially. It's a government entity. And so the Korean Ministry of Culture, Sports, and Tourism runs KESPA. And the goal was to make esports official, make it sanctioned, make it profitable, and to protect the players. Okay? And so at the time of me writing this, KESPA regulated like dozens of esports teams, OGN, MSL, Pandora TV, Africa TV, I think now, like tons of things. And so StarCraft really made, like, StarCraft was like baseball in South Korea. You have no idea. You turn on the TV and it's like the news followed by StarCraft. Insane. There were TV channels dedicated to StarCraft and video games. However, it never really caught on in North America like it did in Korea. What caught on more so in North America was Counter-Strike and first-person shooter games. And so while Korea was absolutely dominated by StarCraft and dominated StarCraft and other RTS games, it was really like Eastern Europe and the West that really got into first-person shooters and Counter-Strike. And for some reason, even though like stereotypically the best video game players at the time were coming out of Korea, they never really got into first-person shooters at all until like Overwatch, which was like 4 years ago. It's crazy how they really stuck to strategic games. Probably there was more money in them. I don't know why. But anyway, this was where esports really started to take off at the turn of the millennium at, oh God, that makes it sound so old, 20 years ago with the formation of KESPA and OGN Star League. 2000, the birth of the multiplayer online battle arena happened, even though they didn't know it yet. So in MOBA games, two teams compete to destroy each other's enemy base. And so there's some nexus, or what is it called? What's the nexus called in Dota? I can't remember. I've only played it a couple of times. So here you have a base. Here you have another base. You have minions or NPCs walking toward each other, and you play heroes. The ancient, okay. You have heroes that kill creeps for money, and then eventually go to kill the other person's base. The player controls a single character, and periodic spawn NPC creeps like move toward other sides of the map. Now, people think that Dota was the very first MOBA. It technically wasn't. For StarCraft, there was a StarCraft Brood War. So the original StarCraft, the Brood War expansion, there was a map called Aeon of Strife. And it was the first really known MOBA type game. It was a good idea. It had the idea of like money and heroes or champions and like achieving that sort of objective, but it was implemented poorly. So Aeon of Strife, not people know that exists, but it was really the first MOBA game. In 2002, we saw Warcraft 3. So Warcraft 3 was like a 3D or 2.5D version of Warcraft 2. You had 4 playable races. It was extremely micro-focused. So people asked, well, what's the difference between Warcraft 3 and StarCraft? The macro game, so like the economics in Warcraft 3 is sort of trivial in compared to StarCraft. You don't expand as much. You sort of keep your, you artificially keep your army supply low in order not to get taxed. And so it's like really micro-heavy type of game. But with Warcraft 3 came a vastly improved map editor. And so the map editor was so good that you could actually design completely other games within Warcraft 3. And the most popular, as of course you know by now, was Dota, Defense of the Ancients. And it was the first really popular MOBA game, and the creators of the original Dota mod said that they were influenced by the Aeon of Strife mod from StarCraft Brood War. So they're actually on record as saying that. But because Warcraft 3 had the game mechanic of heroes, and heroes could have money and inventories, that's really what put Defense of the Ancients over Aeon of Strife. Because in Aeon of Strife, you could designate a unit as special, but it couldn't have an inventory as such. So down here, you can see the screenshot where you have like, boots that make you run faster or a claw that make you do more damage. And so Dota really blew up the MOBA MOBA genre. And you could buy items at a shop, you could be on teams. And so it's crazy. It's absolutely crazy that the only reason that currently the most profitable type of video game that actually exists is because some guy in his house created a mod for Warcraft 3. And that was only possible because the good Blizzard at the time created the tools to allow you to edit the game. And, the tools for editing, for allowing you to create your own custom Overwatch stuff has gotten a lot better, granted. But, the Blizzard of old has not been around for a while. In 2002, you saw the Evolution Championship Series, or EVO. So EVO is it started as Battle by the Bay in 1995 as a Street Fighter II tournament, but grew every year into the EVO that we now know and love. And in 2015, when I last updated this, they play all sorts of video games. Okay, so there's tons of games that are being played, and I don't really have time to play this video, just an intro to like what EVO is. You can go look at what EVO is online. But like the really interesting thing, actually, no, let me play this. I got time, screw it. The really interesting thing about the fighting game scene is that you have to play tournaments in fighting games in person. Like, you couldn't just go be toxic online playing Dota or playing Quake or something. You had to sit next to a physical human being and like speak to them nicely, so you'd be invited back and stuff like that. So the fighting game scene was really unique in competitive video games, and I want to just play a bit of this game to show you like, how hype these fighting games can actually get. All right, so that's like, just a little taste of fighting game scene and how cool it is because, you have to be semi-reasonable human beings in order to play it. You can't just be toxic online. So I'm not going to go over this whole graph, but basically over the next 20 years, a bunch of stuff happened. A bunch of leagues were formed. We have like DreamHack, QuakeCon, Kespa, WCG, EVO, MLG, IEM, GSL, all these things formed. They're all running to this day. I just haven't updated stuff in a long time. So really cool that you still see a lot of these things running like 20 years later. In 2011, along came the Super Tournaments. This had never been seen in video games before. League of Legends, another MOBA game. The most popular MOBA game probably in terms of players over time. In 2011, the first prize for the first League of Legends World Final was $50,000. In 2012 to 2015, it was $1 million, and it was almost $2 million in 2017. Crazy, crazy amounts of prize money, 10 times more than any other tournament at the time. And that's because Riot Games, of course, was super rich and they wanted people to get good. But then came along Dota, and they said, screw your prize money, League. We're going to actually have some prize money. And the International... So Dota 2, its super tournament, TI, just has completely dominated the amount of money in esports since its inception. So here you see, for example, I don't know what it was last year or this year, but in 2018, $11 million of just prize money. And like someone in the chat said, even more money with sponsorships. So here, up until 2014, you can see that like for a long time, Counter-Strike had the most money in it, and then StarCraft kind of took over, and then League of Legends and Dota really started pushing most of the money. So here, for example, the blue is Counter-Strike, then the green is League of Legends, the yellow is StarCraft, and the orange is Dota. So those four games really drove like 70 to 80% of all the video game esports money. Here's another out-of-date graph. This is the amount of esports prize money that's been given out over the years, and it was even by 2016 it was up to $100 million. So lots of money being given out for esports prizes. Not only that, but here's the total amount of prize money given out from the top 5 games in terms of like the tournament prize money that they've given out. Dota 2 has given out $230 million. $230 million in prize money. $100 million from CSGO, $100 million from Fortnite, 80 million League of Legends, 30-something million StarCraft 2. So much prize money from these games. The highest tournaments of all time. Oh, look at this. The total prize money for the TI 2018 was $25 million. We've got like 50 different tournaments that have each given out more than $1 million in prize money. Oh, this is the same graph but newer. So here you go. Here's the TI 2019. Here's the highest earning players. Oh, sorry. I meant to put the highest earning players. So the highest earning players, I accidentally overwrote the graph. It's like something between $5 and $6 million or $5 and $7 million. But I just also wanted to show that the highest earning players with no super tournaments, so no tournament with more than $1 million of prize money, Counter-Strike is in first, followed by StarCraft 2, then Counter-Strike, then StarCraft 2, then Counter-Strike, then StarCraft 2. But look at this. Flash, who played StarCraft Brood War, is still in the top 20 of prize money. This is how good this guy was at StarCraft Brood War. That he stopped earning prize money like at least 10 years ago, and he's still in the top 20. Crazy. Then everything changed, right? When the Fire Nation attacked. Or not that, but when live streaming happened. So in 2007, Justin TV, live streaming, the gaming section of Justin TV grew so strongly and so quickly. Like, who watched the first GDQs on Justin TV? I certainly did. It became Twitch TV in 2011. So what is Twitch TV? This is hilarious. This is absolutely amazing that I'm giving this talk now, because I first gave the talk in 2012, and I had to explain to people what Twitch TV was. And now I'm giving the lecture on Twitch. It blows my mind that it's come full circle, right? And so by far the largest streaming site. It had $40 million in initial capital. It has nearly a monopoly on the market right now. It's the fourth largest U.S. bandwidth user as of 2017. I don't know if that's changed. So Netflix, Google, and Apple each use more. It was bought by Amazon in September 2014 for $970 million, and I'd say they got a good price for it. Here's some more recent numbers. So the monthly broadcasters, there are 3.8 million monthly online broadcasters of video games. And the average concurrent viewers of video game media in 2020 is up to 1.44 million. And if you want to break that down by site, here you can see that Twitch is way out in the lead. YouTube gaming is catching up. It's almost half of Twitch. I had no idea of that. There's so many people. I don't even see Facebook on this graph. I don't know if Facebook just sucks or there's not that many people watching it, but it's not on the graph. And of course, Mixer in 2019, rip to Mixer, but that's all you can do, right? That's what this is. So the last thing I'll do is, someone sort of alluded to this before. I compiled a few of my favorite moments from years gone by in esports history, and I'll just play this for you now. After this is over, I'll wrap up the lecture, so stick around for the end of this lecture. This one might be loud, so I'm going to turn it down a bit, but some fun moments here for sure.
Rare footage of Daigo actually angry. Justin's turtle style. Overcome Rao. Now on the verge of putting Daigo down 1-0.
Okay, I paused 1 second. So, for those of you who don't know what's going on here, I'm sure by this point you've all seen this clip. But this is Justin Wong versus Daigo, I believe. This is the semifinals of the largest Street Fighter tournament at the time. So, in Street Fighter, if you block a special move, it takes a sliver of your health away. If you look up here... Oh my god, that's so loud. If you look up here at Ken's health, he has no health left. Chun-Li did their super move, which kicks you like, 25 times or something crazy, maybe 15 times. If any of those kicks are blocked, Ken will die. So what he has to do is parry every single kick. In order to parry something, you have to press the forward, you have to move into it, and in like a 6-frame window, like a 1/10 of a second or something. So every single one of these has to be parried in order for it to be stopped. It's absolutely nuts. Okay, so I'm going to introduce... This clip is amazing. So this clip is just here to show the hypeness of the Korean broadcasters, okay? The Kespa broadcasters were legendary for screaming and screaming and screaming. And so it is Brood War. Yes, someone out there... So there's a Zerg spell in StarCraft called Plague. And because of the accent, the Korean broadcasters are yelling "plague-gu," and so "plague-gu" is plague, but with a Korean accent. And for any of you who are at Memorial, why I started laughing, you can hear how loud this clip is, okay? You can hear how loud this clip is. I gave this lecture in 2017 on the 4th floor of the engineering building, on the speakers on the walls, and I had no idea how loud the speakers were going to be. So I turned it down a little bit, but it was still really, really loud. And all of a sudden you hear, "Plague-gu, plague-gu, plague." And like 5 seconds later, this prof comes running in from the next from the next classroom, bangs on the door, and I open the door. He's like, "What in the hell are you doing? We have an exam next door." So I can just imagine a bunch of engineering students writing an exam, and then they hear "plague-gu, plague-gu" coming from the next classroom. Oh my God, I'm almost crying just thinking about that. Anyway, I just wanted to give the context for that before I show the clip.
비행기! 예! 자, 이렇게 해서 자, 커리어 뒤쪽으로 빠져! 플레이그! 야, 플레이그가 한 방입니다. 이제 베스는 한 방짜리예요. 그렇습니다. 플레이그 한 대 맞은 저 베스는
All right. This is a League of Legends clip. I don't even know if this is popular anymore. I haven't played League in years, but who knows? This is the backdoor, okay? So this is the Expeke, and it's so popular it became a verb in League of Legends. So in League of Legends, you have to kill your opponent's nexus, and your opponent's nexus is usually really well guarded. And so this player Expeke is playing Kassadin, and Kassadin has an ability that allows you to teleport like a short distance. But you have a limited amount of them because as you cast it, it gets more and more expensive with a cooldown. And so he's going to try and backdoor, meaning he gets behind all the enemy players and tries to attack the Nexus before he dies, because if he fails this, his base is completely exposed. So this player tries to backdoor the Nexus of the other team, and I think this is IEM? Yeah, IDM Katowice. And I can't remember the year, maybe like 2013 or something like that, or 2014. But, just absolutely, like, I saw this live, and you don't forget something like this. It was just absolutely incredible.
They've got 2 inhibitors down, and they are just going to pile straight up towards those super minions in the base. You can see there's going in there. Peke is definitely up towards the Nexus. Kevin is going to be able to go towards him. He's trying to do it, but meanwhile they're in the base. Yellow Star's trying to defend them in the base. Peke is trying to take the Nexus down. Is anyone going to be able to deal with this one? Catches him with another axe. He's very low on axe right now. They're pushing on the Nexus to his Peke managed to get it. I do not believe it. Peke's stuck in there. Catching it. Takes down the Nexus. But now he can go crazy. That game was amazing.
That was the best thing I have seen in the entire history of League of Legends. The skill that took there from Peke, the nerves, his hands must have been shaking. My God, probably a burst blood.
Choya is giving him chasing and
All right, so I've got to pause this one. This is like a huge battle in like MLG something or other for StarCraft 2. So here's the Terran player. Here's the Protoss player. The Protoss player is basically winning this game, okay? The only way he loses this game is if he completely messes up. And what you can see here in the middle, right here, this is the outline of a nuclear launch. And so the observer sees this, but, yeah, nuclear launch detected. So the Protoss player can hear that a nuke has been launched somewhere, but he has to look at this tiny red dot somewhere on the map. And if the nuke hits, the Protoss player loses. If the nuke doesn't hit, the Protoss player wins. So that's what the context is for this particular clip.
chasing right into the main base. There's the defensive nuke. If he can hold this wall right here, he's got to melt these zealots. The nuke could go down right in the middle of all these units.
No. Oh, no.
Oh, my God.
And it looks like... Oh, no, Choya.
Scorched Earth, Day 9. Scorched Earth.
Marcus. Marcus, is this real life?
It is.
Is this
happened.
real life? Oh my gosh.
Does he have enough arc?
Okay, here's the next one, which is StarCraft related, and I'll probably have to explain this for people. So, these units that you see on the screen, this is about 30 battle cruisers or 25 battle cruisers. Battle cruisers are like the highest end late game. Yes, it was DJ Wheat and Day 9. This is the highest end, most expensive Terran unit. This ball of units is essentially undefeatable, right? Essentially undefeatable. Can't be defeated. Undefeatable. Except there's one thing that a Protoss player can do to possibly stop this. It's called an Archon toilet. And the Archon toilet is absolutely hilarious. So, there's a spell that the Protoss mothership can cast that's like a black hole. The black hole will last on the ground for like 15 seconds, and for that 15 seconds, anything that comes near it will be sucked into it. And when the 15 seconds is up, everything that was inside it appears like at a single point. Okay? So you can see here how they're all spread out like this. If they're spread out, like the AoE can't really damage them. But what you do is you cast the black hole, you put a bunch of Archons into it, and Archons have a very powerful but very small area of effect attack. And the idea is that all of the units go into the black hole, they all come out, and all the Archons are able to hit with their splash damage all of the battle cruisers at the same time. But it's like one of these all or nothing moments that was just absolutely incredible to witness live.
Archons actually do that. You have to deal so much damage with Archons. I mean, the VCs have so much health. Yeah, he's just pushing, man. He's like, all right, let's do it. Oh my god. Oh my god. Oh my god. But no Archons. Where's his Archons? He needs to get those in there. He gunned down the Archons before it was time. And the Void Rays come out. And Archon goes in. Another Archon goes in. Get in there. Oh my god, what are we seeing? VCs are all going down. I can't believe what I just saw. Oh my god. And he still has a huge amount of supply on that island. What? MVP has no money left.
This last one is like a super famous moment from Dota, but I don't know enough about Dota to really explain this. But it was pretty hype when it happened. So I'll just play this one too.
Going to be the name of the game for IG. Who leads the way? I believe it should be Zoe. They're going to cut for the shorter path. They storm up the river. Patience from Zoe. Waiting in the wings. Navi's about to be caught. Oh, there's the sleep. The surge. He catches everyone. Oh, this could be a total disaster. Vacuum in. Ravage on everyone. The black hole as well. Light of heaven turns it around. Ravage as well. Stolen by Deadly. Are you kidding me? They turn it around. 4 heroes dead for
5
IG.
heroes dead. Chuan trying to survive. Chuan's going to go down. Puppy talked about the Naga counter. It's Light of Heaven. What's his BKB? They turn it around. I don't even know how they're going to do it. Standing ovation from the crowd. The last tower will be going down. And I think they sense blood in the water. They'll keep going. 10-3 is the score right now. No turning back. Boards are coming off cooldown in just 11 seconds. And here we go. This tower, this rack's even not long for life.
All right.